It started with a letter. An actual letter, folded neatly in cream-colored parchment, slipped between bills and junk mail on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. The handwriting was slanted and neat, almost too perfect, as if it belonged to someone who had long ago given up keyboards in favor of ink and time. I didn't think much of it. Neither did Claire, my wife. She stood by the sink, her hair pulled back in a way that always reminded me of the early days, before bills, before the house, before everything became tight and quiet. She flipped through the stack, smiling faintly. "A letter," she said, her voice dancing just a little. "That's rare." I shrugged. Probably another credit consolidation pitch disguised as sentiment. But she was already opening it. I remember the way she read it, first skimming, then slowing down, like the words were crawling up her spine. Her smile deepened, turned private. She folded the paper once, then again, and slipped it into her apron pocket without a word. She didn't mention it again. Not that night. Not the next morning. But I noticed, after a while, the subtle shift. The phone stayed flipped face down more often. Her laughter, when it came, had a delayed quality to it, as though it were echoing from somewhere far away. And she'd started buying those little stationery sets from the boutique downtown. I found one once, hidden under a pile of magazines, filled with unfinished notes and loops of cursive script she rarely used. I never asked about the letter. Part of me didn't want to know. The same part that tells you to look away when you're too close to the edge of a cliff. Claire and I had been married for almost 8 years by then. We met in college. She was a journalism major, always scribbling in a notebook, while I was the guy selling old records from a milk crate outside the student union. She liked stories. I liked music. It worked. Or at least, it used to. There were still good days. Pancakes on Sundays. Laughter during the second glass of wine. But something had thinned between us. Some invisible thread, stretched too far, fraying. One night, I came home late from a work dinner. One of those team-building things where everyone pretends to care about synergy, and found her on the couch, barefoot, a letter in hand. She didn't hear me come in. Her lips moved as she read silently. A faint smile pressed into the corner of her mouth. I stood there longer than I should have, watching. Her face, usually so guarded, was wide open. Vulnerable. Like she was reading a love story and didn't want it to end. "Claire," I said quietly. She jumped, stuffing the paper between couch cushions with a speed that could have been comical if it hadn't made my chest feel like it had caved in. "Hey," she said, breathless. "Didn't hear you come in." I noticed. She offered no explanation, no apology, just got up, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and said, "There's leftover lasagna if you're hungry." The letters kept coming. Once a week, always the same envelope. She never told me who it was. I'd see her eyes light up as she slid the letters into her purse, like they were a secret passageway to somewhere brighter. I started to feel like a guest in my own home. I tried to be rational. Maybe it was an old friend, a cousin, some random pen pal from a forum she'd joined on a whim. Claire was the type who loved words, who still sent birthday cards instead of texts. But she never mentioned a name, never let me read a word. And then came the night I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching some crime docuseries, something about an art thief in Lisbon. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the soft shuffle of movement. Claire was in the dining room, the glow from her laptop the only light. Her fingers were typing gently, almost reverently. And beside her, a half-written letter, ink smudged in the corner. I watched her for a while, the same way I had weeks ago, quiet, observing. She wasn't smiling. She looked serene. More than that, she looked like she belonged there. I got up too fast, made a noise. She turned, startled. The moment shattered. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, voice low. "Yeah," she said. "You either?" "Thirsty," I lied. We stood there in silence. I glanced at the letter, now flipped over. She noticed. "Just an old friend," she said quickly, too quickly. "It helps me unwind." I nodded. She didn't offer more. I didn't ask. The unraveling was slow. Not some violent crash, just the steady erosion of something I thought was bedrock. She started leaving the house more often. "Walks," she said. "Air." But I knew. I wasn't stupid. The way she dressed changed, too, subtly at first. A lipstick shade she hadn't worn in years. Perfume that was too expensive for casual errands. And always, the letters. One day, while she was in the shower, I couldn't help myself. I opened the drawer where she kept them, tucked away neatly, like treasures. I took one. I don't even remember which. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar now. Elegant. Personal. But what gutted me wasn't the words. It was the way they were written. Each sentence curved like it was touching her. Each paragraph a hand on her back, a whisper in her ear. He knew her. Not just facts, but her. Her fears, her dreams. He quoted poems she used to read aloud in our apartment back in college. He remembered her favorite book, her dislike for thunderstorms, her love of rain on windows, but not the sound of thunder. He wrote, "When I close my eyes at night, I picture your handwriting first. It calms me." I felt nauseous. I put the letter back, exactly as I found it. Pretended it hadn't hollowed me out. 1 week later, Claire told me she was going on a retreat. A weekend by the coast. Writing, reading, clearing her head. I nodded. The morning she left, I followed her. I know. It wasn't proud. But I needed to know. Needed to see it with my own eyes. She drove north. Past the city. Past the last gas station. Into the kind of coastal town where people still wave at strangers. She parked at a small bed and breakfast tucked against the shoreline. I waited from a distance, heart in my throat, eyes on the door. And then I saw him. Tall, gray at the temples, wore a wool coat like he'd stepped out of a Hemingway novel. He opened the door, smiled. She walked into his arms like she was walking into sunlight. She didn't look back. I watched them disappear inside. And just like that, everything I'd been afraid of became real. I didn't move. Not at first. I just sat in the car, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, watching the white-painted door she'd just walked through close behind her like it had swallowed a ghost. The sky was the color of charcoal, heavy with fog, and the salty wind off the water seemed to pull at the corners of my sanity. What was I supposed to do? Kick the door down? Confront them? What would that even accomplish, besides giving them exactly what they'd expect? A wounded man, crumpled and raging, proving her right for leaving. No. I waited. 3 hours. That's how long I sat there in the chilled silence of that coastal town, barely breathing. At some point, I realized my hands had gone numb from gripping the wheel. The B&B sign creaked faintly on its iron post, a haunting little metronome counting down to my breaking point. Just before sunset, the front door opened again. Claire emerged, hair tousled from sleep or something more. She was laughing. Not politely or nervously, truly laughing, head back, her whole body lit from inside. I hadn't seen that version of her in years. That version hadn't smiled at me in what felt like centuries. The man followed. His hand grazed the small of her back with practiced intimacy. The kind you don't even think about, because it's yours, because it belongs to you. I started the engine, just to feel something. That night, I drove home, blindsided by memories that came uninvited and unrelenting. Our wedding day, when her hands trembled as she adjusted my boutonniere, whispering how nervous she was. Not about me, she said, but about getting it perfect. The time she cried during a thunderstorm, the kind that rattled the windows and made our dog crawl under the bed, and I held her until the morning light broke the storm spell. The first time she called me by my full name, not out of anger, but love, whispered like it was a secret only she knew. Each of those moments burned through me now like they belonged to someone else. Back home, the house was a mausoleum. Silent, ordered, untouched. Her scent still lingered faintly on the pillows, vanilla and something floral. Her notebooks sat untouched on the coffee table, stacked like polite reminders of the woman she used to be. I wanted to scream, to tear through every drawer, every closet, to make it not neat. But instead, I sat down in the living room, lit only by the blue glow of the aquarium across the room, Claire's little oasis. She'd always loved the way the fish moved in silence. No words, no judgment. Just motion. I picked up her latest notebook, the one with the blue velvet cover. At first, the pages were blank. Then, midway through, I found them. Dozens of letters, written but unsent. Some dated, some not. All addressed to the same name. Ellis. He wasn't just a fling. He had a name, a life, a place in her story. One passage read, "Sometimes I forget the way I used to laugh with my husband. I forget the smell of the apartment we first moved into. But I remember how you signed your first letter, from one forgotten soul to another. And in that, I knew we were the same." I closed the book. My throat was tight, like something had grown inside it and refused to leave. 3 days later, she came back. Not quietly, not guilty. She walked through the front door like she still lived there. "Hi," she said simply, setting her bag down. The drive back was long. I stood in the kitchen, arms crossed. The coffee pot behind me gurgled in a way that made the silence feel louder. "That's all you're going to say?" She blinked, a flicker of hesitation in her otherwise composed face. "Do you want me to say I'm sorry? I want you to tell me the truth." She sighed, leaning against the counter like this was just another long conversation. "You already know. That doesn't make it hurt less." I didn't say it would. There was something so cold in her detachment, like she'd already grieved the loss of us, and I was just now attending the funeral. "How long?" I asked. She took a moment. 9 months. Maybe more. The letters started a year ago. We met online, one of those forums about literature and philosophy. At first, it was just writing. Then it became something else. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I did. 100 times. But how do you say? I found someone who sees me when the man I married only looks through me." That hit harder than I expected. "I didn't stop loving you, Evan," she continued, softer now. "I just started needing someone else." That night, she slept in the guest room. I didn't sleep at all. I kept going over everything, rewinding years, trying to find where it all cracked. But cracks don't announce themselves. They start small, imperceptible, like termites in the walls. And when the collapse comes, it's already too late. In the weeks that followed, we fell into a strange rhythm. She stayed, for reasons I couldn't understand. Said she needed time, space to figure things out. I didn't ask questions. I think I was afraid of the answers. But I noticed she still wrote. Always in the morning, after her coffee. Always with that same faint smile, like the words were more real than I'd ever been. I began to wonder if I was the ghost in this house. I tried to rebuild myself. Started running again, something I hadn't done in years. Went to work early, stayed late. Told myself it helped. But every time I came home, her presence, or the lack of it, hung in the air like perfume that never fades. Then one night, I walked into the house and heard something strange. Laughter. Not hers. A man's. I froze. It was coming from the dining room. I rounded the corner quietly and saw her, sitting at the table, laptop open, headphones on, video chat glowing on the screen. She was leaning into it, head tilted just so, smiling like a schoolgirl. "Ellis." She didn't notice me at first. I backed away before she could. I didn't need to see more. The next morning, I packed a suitcase. She found me by the front door, keys in hand. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Out," I said. "For how long?" I met her eyes. "Until I'm not invisible anymore." She flinched, but didn't stop me. I checked into a hotel that smelled of cleaning products and loneliness. Stared at the ceiling for a long time. Wondered what kind of man watches his wife fall in love with someone else and still hopes she'll come back. That was the moment I realized something awful. I still loved her, but I couldn't stay. A week passed. Then 2. And then, she sent me a letter. It arrived in the same cream-colored envelope. The same careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was only one sentence. "Please come home. There's something you don't know." I read the sentence over and over again. "Please come home. There's something you don't know." It had been nearly 18 days since I walked out. I'd spent every one of them trying to unlearn her name on my tongue, trying to forget the shape of her sleeping beside me. I'd changed the sheets in the hotel room 3 times, though they were never stained, just to convince myself I was shedding the memory of her. But now this letter, just one line, no punctuation beyond that final period. It sat on the table in the dim hotel lamplight like a whisper that refused to go silent. I shouldn't have gone back. But grief wears the mask of hope too easily, and the human heart is a fool for second chances. The house looked unchanged. Same shutters, same neat porch with the dying potted plants she always forgot to water. The neighborhood was quiet, mid-autumn. Leaves scattered the sidewalk in brittle spirals. I stood outside for a long time, watching the lights flicker behind the curtains. I couldn't tell if it felt like home anymore. When I finally opened the door, the smell hit me first, lavender and ink. She was writing again. Claire sat at the dining table, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, a cup of tea steaming beside her. She looked up when she saw me, like she hadn't been sure I'd come. "You're here," she said. "You asked." She nodded and gestured to the seat across from her. I sat down without taking off my coat. "I need to tell you something," she began. Her voice was steady, but there was something fraying at the edges. I waited. Ellis isn't who you think he is. I blinked, meaning. She hesitated, then stood, walked to the hall, and returned with a box. It was small and wooden, like an old jewelry case. She set it between us and lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, yellowing, creased, some still sealed, all addressed in the same handwriting, all postmarked from the same small town up north. I told you we met online, she said. That wasn't exactly true. Ellis, he was my pen pal. From when I was 15. We wrote for years. Stopped after college. But when the lockdown happened, I found his last letter tucked in one of my old journals. I wrote to the return address, not expecting anything. And he replied. She nodded. At first, it was simple, just catching up. Nostalgia. But then he told me. He was dying. Some rare disease. Said he didn't have much time left. Said he wanted to write again, to leave something behind. The words hit like water finding a crack in a frozen lake. He was never here, Evan, she said, her eyes shining now. I never met him. We never touched. Every letter, every emotion, I lived them, but they were only ever words. They felt real, and maybe that's what scared me. I didn't want to tell you because I wasn't sure what it meant. If I was falling in love, or if I was just remembering who I used to be. I stared at the box, at the carefully preserved pieces of her emotional infidelity. So why the retreat? The B&B? She inhaled sharply. He asked to meet. For closure. One weekend, just words in person, he said. And I agreed. But he never showed up. I waited the whole night. When I came home, I found a final letter in the mail. She handed it to me. I unfolded it slowly. Claire, I couldn't do it. I'm not strong enough to see you and not stay. And I can't stay. I wouldn't be kind to you. I am jealous of your world. Your marriage. Even the grief you carry. It means you lived fully. I lived mostly through pages. That was enough, until it wasn't. I love you. In the only way I know how. Ellis. There was a tear stain on the bottom corner. I didn't know what to feel. Rage? Relief? Jealousy of a man I would never meet? I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing space, oxygen, a moment. The tiles felt cold beneath my feet, grounding. Claire followed quietly and leaned against the doorway. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning? I didn't know how, she said. At first, it felt harmless. Then it didn't. I started feeling more alive in those letters than I did in my own home. And that terrified me. Were you going to leave me? I don't know. That hurt more than a yes. That night, I didn't leave. We sat in silence for hours. Not speaking, just coexisting. I found myself reading the letters. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. I needed to understand what part of her he had uncovered that I hadn't reached in years. They were beautiful, poetic, filled with longing, sorrow, laughter tucked in metaphors. He wrote about old music, about his mother's garden, about regrets and childhood dreams. But more than anything, he wrote about her, the way she saw the world, the things she forgot to say out loud. It struck me then. She needed someone to hear her unspoken thoughts. And maybe I had stopped listening. The next morning, I woke before her. I made coffee and sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog lift from the grass. When she joined me, she didn't say anything, just rested her head on my shoulder. Is it over? I asked. Yes, she said. He passed. A week after I got home. I closed my eyes. How do you grieve a man you never met? I don't know, she whispered. But I have been. Quietly. We sat there until the sun broke through the clouds. Over the next few days, things felt suspended. We didn't fall back into each other. We didn't even share the same bed. But we talked, more than we had in years. Not about Ellis, but about us. The chasm that had grown. The silences that had spoken louder than arguments. I told her about the letter I read. About the night I watched her disappear into the B&B. About how I stood outside like a stranger looking into someone else's life. I thought you were choosing him, I said. I was choosing myself, she replied. I just didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? She didn't fall in love with him, not really. She fell in love with who she was when she wrote to him. Unguarded, curious, young again. And maybe I had forgotten how to let her be that version of herself with me. Then came the envelope. Another letter. But this time, addressed to me. Claire found it in the mailbox, postmarked before Ellis's death. I opened it with shaking hands. Evan, if you're reading this, Claire told you the truth. I hope she did. I hope she still has courage in her veins. I want you to know something, from one man to another. She never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Even when she was writing to me, it was always through the lens of you. Your history, your silence, your music. She spoke of you the way people speak of home. Don't let her go. Forgive her, not for the letters, but for forgetting how to share them with you. Be the man who listens without waiting to speak. That's all. Ellis. I folded the letter and sat with it in my lap for a long time. When Claire came into the room, she paused. Her eyes searched mine. What did he say? I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, tears forming but not falling. He was always better with words, she said with a bittersweet smile. I took her hand. I can be too, I said. If you'll let me try. She nodded. I want to come home too, she said. That night, we shared a bed for the first time in weeks. But not as husband and wife. As two people beginning again, beneath the weight of ink and ashes. Rebuilding wasn't a matter of days or weeks. It was months of subtle silence and cautious grace, a quiet negotiation between two people trying to unlearn distance and remember the shape of each other's breathing. Claire and I moved like ghosts in our own home at first, orbiting around one another in fragile alignment. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, we began to come back. It started with small things. She left her notebooks on the coffee table again, not hidden in drawers. I started reading them, not snooping, not spying, just reading. She let me. I would sit beside her in the evenings, sipping tea, flipping pages while she read beside me. And when I reached a passage that curled too close to a wound, she didn't flinch. She would touch my hand and say, "That was then." And I believed her. There were nights I still woke up sweating, my mind replaying the image of her walking into that inn, laughing in someone else's arms. But I'd look beside me, and she'd be there, her hand resting on my chest like an anchor. Sometimes she whispered in her sleep. Once she said his name. She didn't know. I didn't tell her. Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not tidy. It's not a closing of a book. It's choosing to keep reading, even when the pages hurt. One morning, I woke to find her gone from the bed. The window was open. Dawn was just bleeding into the room. I followed the sound of the back screen door creaking and found her in the yard, barefoot in dew-covered grass, holding a single letter in her hand. I stood on the porch, watching her from a distance. She didn't see me at first. She was reading. It wasn't Ellis's handwriting. She had written to herself. I learned that later, when she handed me the pages. A letter addressed not to me, not to Ellis, but to the woman she used to be before all of this. You forgot your own voice, it read. You buried it in dinner parties and matching towels and muted arguments. You thought you needed a stranger to find yourself again, but all you needed was permission. I folded it and held her hand. I want to try something, I said. She tilted her head, curious. I want us to write letters, I said. To each other. Once a week. Just letters. No phones, no texts. Just paper. Like when we were new. She smiled, wide and stunned, like I'd just opened a door she'd been afraid to ask about. I'd like that. And so we did. Every Sunday, a letter under a plate, slipped into a coat pocket, hidden between the pages of a book. Sometimes only a paragraph. Sometimes pages. Sometimes the letters were confessions. I still think about how it felt to be invisible. I'm afraid you'll drift again. Sometimes they were memories. Do you remember that thunderstorm in the first apartment, when the power went out and we lit every candle we owned? You used to hum in your sleep. Sometimes they were promises. I'm still choosing you. Winter passed into spring. The house changed with the seasons. We painted the bedroom a pale shade of blue that made the lights softer in the mornings. We cleared out the guest room where she used to sleep after the fallout and turned it into a library, books stacked on every wall. She brought in her old journals. I framed one of her letters and hung it above the writing desk. And the box of Ellis's letters? She buried it. Not in anger, not in shame. She wrapped them in silk, placed them in a tin, and buried them in the garden where the lavender grew. She said it felt right, that the man who helped her remember herself should be part of something that continued growing. I owe him that, she said. I know, I replied. We held hands in silence as the wind swept through the lilac trees, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel second to a memory. Our marriage wasn't the same, but maybe that was the point. We weren't meant to be the people we were when we met. We were meant to become. And somewhere in those inked pages, in the scars we traced and retold, we found a new story. Not perfect, not without pain, but ours. The last letter she ever wrote to Ellis, She read to me aloud before placing it in the earth. You were the map, but he is the destination. Thank you for helping me find my way. And as spring settled fully into the folds of our quiet little world, I realized something. We had never stopped writing our story. We had only turned the page.